you guys, this is Nikki, and today I am working on a autumn leaf, and I'm doing it for a couple of things. Sorry if I slow down you guys to talk, it's just because I'm concentrating. So anyways, this leaf is for a greeting card. I'm doing seasonal holiday greeting cards, and there's also a local exhibition coming up in my area, and it has to do with small things in nature and kind of focusing on like if you were really small, like things that you would notice in nature, maybe see, or just highlighting that. So I was already doing these for my greeting cards, and I saw that exhibition, so I am sort of on a deadline, and that's what I'm working on today. So I'm just going to be talking to you guys as I paint and kind of talk you through my process, and hopefully help you guys as you work. So right now, obviously I've drawn in the leaf, if you can see, just the outline of it, and these are little guys. It's just a 6x4 area, and I kind of put in like the base colors that I see. I am working from a photograph. That's my setup. And I went and picked out the leaves and took the photographs myself, so that when I paint them, it's sort of like you're looking down on the leaves just like I was. And we'll get some nice shadows to put in here, so it'll really look like the leaf is just sitting on the page, which I think is kind of cool. So what I did in here is I laid in the base colors that I see. I started with sort of like the brown tones down in here, and you can see that on my photo, like in there. And then I went over with the yellow and kind of blended those together, and same thing up here, like some yellow tones, orange. And I'm just kind of painting what I see. Part of the reason I picked the leaves is because it already looks like watercolor, which I think is really cool. So it's easier for me to paint. So I laid in the base colors, and then now I'm kind of going in just in the areas that I've done, and I'm laying in like the really deep darks in contrast with sort of these lighter edges, and that's gonna give it that dimension that we want. And then when I'm done with the whole leaf, then I'll go back in and add some of the shadows, and that's really gonna make it super realistic. So right now I'm just working on this little stem area, and I really like this little leaf because there's a lot of colors in it. And sorry, I have to concentrate. I'm mixing. Right now I'm doing like a green tone. There's some green in this little stem part, which is really nice. So I have like a deep blue-green going, and I'm just kind of filling that in, looking at my darks. So I'm always looking at the tones. I've talked about this before. I'm looking at how dark a color is and how light the colors are, because you know, I try and get the colors right, but it's almost more important to get the dark and lightness right, because that's what's gonna make it really pop. So I'm just kind of working on the stem area. And I'm just painting what I see. So I paint colors. I've left this little white area because I can tell that it's lighter in the picture, and it's almost like, I don't even know what color that is. It's like a gray, almost like a gray-brown, and it's like barely, it's a very thin line. But see how that pops? So I left the white in there to go over it later, because with watercolor, once you put the paint down, you really can't get the white back. So I'm really careful to leave those really light spaces, because that's gonna give it a lot of dimension. So right now, as I'm painting this, I have to be really careful not to close up that little gap, so that we get that dimension. And you can see that my brush, I mean, I work with really small brushes. I like working on sort of a small scale with watercolor. I don't know, I think a lot of people, or I've heard a lot of people say that watercolor is so loose, and I think, I mean, I was taught in school, like, we would put water on the paper and then put the colors over it, but that obviously runs, it makes the paint really runny, and that is useful. Like, I did kind of do that a little bit when I was working with, like, sort of the full shading of the leaf, like all of the different colors like blending together. But when I get into these more intricate areas, I keep my brush pretty dry because then the color's not gonna bleed all over. So now I'm just mixing those tones. There's some green in there. And I do layer the colors, watercolor a lot. You can't layer too much because then your paper is going to peel, but there's definitely room, and you want to layer a little bit because that's how you get a lot of depth of color. So I've got this blue-green kind of coming in here, and I can see in this, I don't know if you can see this tiny little spot that I'm painting, but the paper has become pretty wet, so the color's not holding. So sometimes I have to wait for it to dry. This little blue-green spot is too light. It's coming out too light. And when that happens, that just means that the paper's too wet to hold the color. So this little area, this tiny little area that I'm working on is not done, but I have to wait for it to dry to go back in there. If I were to go in there with a really dark color right now, it would just bleed and it wouldn't hold the color. So I'm gonna move on. It'll dry in like a minute. I'm gonna move on up the stem. And like I said, I keep my brush pretty dry for watercolor. Put in some darks here. All the way up the stem. And I'm going to keep the outline that I have. I've drawn it in, but I'm going to keep that stem, like this line, white next to this dark brown until kind of the very last minute. And then I'll go back in and add a really light color. It's important when you do that though with watercolor. If I'm adding like a really light color against a dark color, I have to make sure that that's really, really dry. Otherwise, it's just going to bleed together. And I paint really thin anyways. I actually paint really thin with oil and watercolor. So I've never really had issues with waiting for something to dry because my paint always dries really quickly because I paint really thin. Alright, and I see some red in there, so I'm going to go to this color. I don't know what color this is. It has like an orangey, it's like an orange brown. This is like my yellow brown, orange brown, brown brown. And if I really want to get like a colder brown, then I mix it with blue. And that's how I get like that black color. I like mixing my colors. I don't like buying colors that are kind of like pre-mixed. I try mixing as much as I can. And that's just a personal preference. I mean, I don't know. I think my artwork takes on a more organic look, and that's not really good or bad. It just is a preference. Alright, so I've got some really darks. So like I said, I'm mixing that brown with blue. And that gives me like that really dark, dark color. This is really dark in here. And obviously, I mean, I do really small strokes. I'm going to get my brush a tiny bit wet because it was too dry. The paint's not coming off. I use really small strokes because I have to pay attention to every little drop that I put on there. So I work pretty slowly. So that's lighter than I was going for. So all that means is, it just means that you need more paint on your brush. So I'm gonna mix some more dark blue and then some dark brown and see how black that is. So now I'm gonna have a lot of paint on my brush because I just mixed. So I'm gonna dab some off and then go back to my paper and watch. This color will be really dark. It's dried a little bit. So it's almost black, which is what I wanted. And like I said, it doesn't need to dry. Like, I paint so thin that even a few seconds will dry the paper a little bit. It's almost like putting together a puzzle. Alright, so I'm laying in some darks on the stem area, but I'm going to go back and kind of bleed them out a little bit and blend them with the rest of the leaf. Some areas of this leaf are really crisp, and some areas kind of bleed together naturally like watercolor. Like it looks like watercolor on the leaf itself. So some of these dark areas are like the more crisp areas. And sometimes they bleed with the rest of the colors of the leaf. Alright, so now I'm going to take the paint off my brush, clean it completely, and I'm going to switch gears and mix a green, sort of like a mid-tone green. And I'm going to go where I was painting in that dark area. And what I'm painting, you guys, is this. So it, like, see how the green like bleeds out from the brown? So I'm gonna go back in and I'm gonna add the mid-tone green right next to it. And I'm not blending it yet, I'm just letting the color on the paper. And like literally, obviously I dot it in sometimes. That's how slow I'm going. Just to make sure that I have it all right. And I'm gonna get, that's a little lighter than I want, so I'm gonna get a little more on my brush. Need some water. And I'm gonna go back in, add some more. Alright, now it's starting to blend on its own, which is good. Now I'm gonna dry my brush, get all the color off of it, and I'm gonna go back and blend it. And the brush is gonna pick up a little paint, and that's okay. I'm gonna dry it, get all that color off, and now really blend it into this lighter area. And all I do when I blend is you just kind of almost like pet it with the paintbrush. Very lightly. Just the very tip. See, it's blending. This is my favorite part of painting. This is arguably why I paint. Because when you blend things, it becomes real. And I get just as surprised as everyone else, and it makes me so happy. It's really starting to blend. And you might be wondering, I left this tiny little white spot in the middle of the dark. That was on purpose. There's like this little area of stem that's poking out, so I'm adding some orange to it. Blend that too. See, I blended. A little more dark. So now, since I blended it, I kind of lost some of that definition. So I'm just gonna go back and add some of my darks. And that's what blending is all about, for me at least. I don't know how other people do it. But you blend and you'll lose some paint, and then you go and add it back in. And you might take away and then add and take away and add, and that's kind of how it works. So I'm adding some of the darks. And I'm just looking at the shape, like if I'm going slow, it's just because I'm looking up at the leaf to make sure I have everything. I'm almost like drawing right now. Looking good. A little more paint. A little more blue-green. So like I said, like you add, take away, until you get it just right. Blend more. And I'm actually right now picking up some of the orange off the paper, like right in there. So I'm gonna go back and add some of that color that I lost. And it's starting to really blend out. Make this smaller. And it seems like I work on, you know, one section for a long time, and I do. And that's just how I work. That's why I like working small with watercolor. I like working on all of these little details. So now I'm mixing an orange color because I'm going to start working up in here. In this sort of base color, it's like a dark, pretty deep orange. And it crosses over into the green and makes like a green-brown color, and that's good. That's what I'm seeing in the leaf. And it's a little darker than that, so I'm gonna go with my dark brown, get a little blue on there, and pop in a darker brown. And then I'm gonna blend this out, let it bleed. And yeah, I think you can start to see the color coming out. Alright, well I hope that helped you guys. It's a little bit from what I'm doing today.